up near Escort, just chilling for a few days. And the one day I drove out onto where the dam was on the farm, and I parked on the dam wall, and I just went there to spend some time with God, read, and just do some thinking. To my right-hand side was this dam, which you can see in the bottom right here. But right in front of me was this big tree. I pulled in my phone and just took a photo of this tree, and I spent some time just sitting there. I was reading my Bible, but thinking, and through this tree, I felt God speak to me. I don't think every time God speaks to me, I need to make it into a message. But through all of these different thoughts that I had were the seeds of this morning's message. And so I'd like to give it a title, is Rooted. What struck me about this tree, first up, was that there was not a single leaf, or maybe 2 or 3 dry leaves, but it was totally bare branches. The middle of winter, the tree has no leaves on it. But if you look carefully, you'll see that this tree with absolutely bare branches is situated in the best possible place for a tree to be, right next to water. They've had some rains up there, the dams were looking nice and full. And this tree, although there were no green leaves on it, it was planted in the right place with every expectation of spring just around the corner. I got to thinking that often during the winters that we experience at different times in our lives, it's possible to compare the bare branches that some of our, or the leafless branches that some of our trees have in our soils, compare them to the very green leaves that exist on the branches of other people's lives, because we have winters in different seasons. It's not like every one of us hits winters at the same time. And it's possible for a very unhealthy sense of comparison, a very unhealthy sense of discontentment, an unhealthy sense of restlessness to get into our souls when we look at branches that are a little bit bare and we look at green leaves on some of the branches of other people, whatever that means in different areas and different aspects. And I'd like to suggest that comparison in that way is not a helpful thing compared to this question. Am I planted in the correct place? Am I in good soil, and am I next to good water? Which led on to this thought. Is this picture of the tree that I've put up, this picture that I was looking at and that I took, what you can see is only a portion of the tree. It's the portion of the tree that's above the ground. But what's beneath the surface is as important, if not more important, than what's above the surface. In other words, the unseen is more important than the seen. Because if there were no root structure going down into the soil, this tree has no hope for spring, no hope for future green leaves. And hence my title this morning is the title, Rooted. This is it's a one-off. We've got Angus next week, and then after that we're going into a 4-week series on the glory of God, which I've been thinking and preparing for. I'm very excited to get into that. But this was to kickstart our very exciting term that's coming up. And I'm asking you, as I am doing as well, is to this morning look beneath the surface, the branches part of our lives, into our root system and our root structure. And I'd like to ask you today, how are you doing beneath the surface? How's it going in the part that's more important than the branches which are above the surface? The Bible says this in Psalm 92, verse 12 to 15. There's a number of different Bible references to this idea or this metaphor. It says this: the righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon, planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. The next 2 verses say they will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green, proclaiming the Lord is upright. He is my rock. There is no wickedness in him. I got to thinking when I was reading this verse and thinking about this tree, about different people that I know and people that I've interacted with who I would like to suggest are properly rooted. And like some of the characteristics of properly rooted people in a spiritual sense, are shown in this verse. If you don't mind flicking down to the next slide. It says that properly rooted people will flourish. That's not to say there aren't some winter seasons when there might be some bare branches, but over years, people whose root system is in solid soil next to good water, spiritually speaking, tend to flourish in their lives. It goes on to say that they will grow. My experience of being around people with deep roots is that they're on a constant journey of growth. They don't live in a spiritual bonsai state. Try and keep it as small and as neat and trimmed as possible. Being spiritually rooted means I'm growing in different ways. And what I love about, and I'm no expert in trees, but if you look at all the different expressions of trees, the ways different branches go, different types of leaves, God's so creative. He doesn't cause us all to grow in the same way. But if you're deeply rooted, you'll continue to grow. The third thing that this verse says on the next slide about people that are deeply rooted is that they'll have spiritual longevity. And this is something I've seen to be true, is that when people grow deep roots, they don't tend to have these massive ups and downs, ins and outs, connection and disconnection with God, church, the Bible, etc., etc. They've got this spiritual longevity which carries them through the years, which become decades, which becomes a lifetime. Don't you love these words? It says they will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green. Gordon MacDonald, who I think is now in his 70s, if not approaching 80, writes an amazing book called The Life God Blesses. And in that book, he speaks about growing old. And he says that when your body grows older, it starts to slow down and in some ways shrink a little. But he says the beauty of a life that's spiritually connected in a proper way is that you never shrink. You continue to grow and grow and grow. So although on the outside this body might weaken, spiritually the spiritual part of you is growing bigger and stronger the more years you have of being deeply rooted. In this amazing congregation, some of the biggest spiritual giants with the deepest root systems are those that have the highest number of years with deep faith. And I want to celebrate that this morning, that you've had spiritual longevity with the faith system that's not afraid of winters, because that's another characteristic of people that are properly rooted, is they're not scared of winter seasons, knowing that they do roll around. And as I look over some of the silver crowns, as the Bible calls them, that sit here and that are part of Golden Warriors on Friday mornings with Ernie and Ann, the deep prayer life that many of you carry, the way that you pray for your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, is a testimony to a root structure that is deeply rooted, that knows you can still bear fruit and stay fresh, not get crusty in old age, as this verse says. Funnily enough, on this morning I happened to be sitting looking at this tree. You've heard me say before, possibly, that I use a bookmark system of just working my way through the Bible consistently. My New Testament bookmark happened to fall on John 15 on this exact morning, which is another metaphor of spiritual life, of being connected into the right soil and the right thing. So I'd like to read some of the verses from that chapter. Jesus is speaking, and he says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it'll be even more fruitful. Verse 4, I'm not reading all the verses, just selecting some of them. Verse 4, he says, remain in me as I also remain in you. That sentence right there is just mind-blowing. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Verse 8, this is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Verse 9, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. Final verse, verse 17, this is my command, love each other. I'd like to draw two big thoughts out of this text this morning in our shortened service. And the first big thought is this, is that Christ is our source. He uses the picture of the vine and the branches. Based on my imagery, I'd like to use a picture of the soil and this tree. Jesus said this, he said, remain in me as I also remain in you. Apart from me, you can do nothing. When I think of this tree and this picture, I think of how important it is for the tree to remain in the soil. So the tree is in the soil with very, very deep roots. But at the same time, the soil is getting into the tree. There are nutrients in the soil. There is water in the soil. Everything you see above the surface is because it was in the soil in the first place. The source of all the goodness comes from in the ground and, of course, the sunshine and the air. So if you like, Christ is the source above the surface and beneath the surface. And his command is remain, remain, remain. The King James Version uses the word abide in me and I in you. And where this restlessness of soul sometimes what causes us to uproot at different times and in some parts of our life tumbleweed along, Christ's injunction to us is abide, remain, dig your roots deeper and deeper and deeper. The tree doesn't just get benefits by believing in the soil and saying, I believe that soil exists. In the same way, as Christ followers, we don't get the benefits just by believing that Christ exists and that he died for our sins. It's by abiding, remaining, connected to him every single day. Well, I'm excited about that. What are the ways that we abide, that we remain? A couple of ideas, by no means exhaustive, but firstly through his word. Through reading and thinking about and obeying the Bible. In Psalm 1, it says this, blessed is the one whose delight is in the law of the Lord and meditates on his law. That's thinking about it day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. As well as reading the Bible, the way that we abide and draw these nutrients, if you like, from Christ is in prayer, personal prayer, talking to God and listening, making this a daily habit, not just a weekly or monthly occurrence when there's tough times. A properly rooted person, spiritually rooted. If you go and scratch beneath the surface, my guess is you'll find people who spend consistent time reading, thinking about and obeying Christ's word, talking to him. This prayer meeting we're having tomorrow night, I hope when that announcement came on, mentally you pulled out your calendar, you thought 6 to 7 tomorrow night is a church prayer meeting. We have 2 per term. We're inviting the whole church tomorrow to join us in fasting from when you wake up. That's going without food from when you wake up till 7 p.m. And we're going to be praying in the Ever Sky room upstairs where our kids' church meets, for God to touch other people. For our Alpha course, for Angus, and for the Flourish Women's Conference, we're spending an hour talking to God, believing that this is where our roots actually exist. If for some reason you can't make it tomorrow night, please set aside some time. Set an alarm that sometime between 6 and 7 p.m. to personally pray, to join your prayers with ours to say, God, we're trusting you for the things that are coming up. If you physically can't go without food for whatever reason, you're pregnant, operate heavy machinery of some medical condition, give up something tomorrow from when you wake up till 7 p.m. and set some of that time aside for prayer, talking to God, connecting with Him. Another way that we stay rooted is by thinking about Him. Hebrews 3 verse 1 says, fix your thoughts on Jesus. Every now and then I ask my boys, because I'm asking myself, is this last week, how much did you think about God and about Jesus? Is He the subject of some of our thoughts? Do we reference Him as we're doing life? Or do we have these shallow little roots that just think on Him every now and then, particularly at church on Sundays? That's like our time reserved for God. The rest of the time's for me. Deeply rooted people understand that apart from Christ, all my activity amounts to nothing. Because that's what He said. What about, finally, about Christ being our source, is being rooted in His community. Just quickly, we've got some amazing life groups. 165, I think there were the last time Pete told me. Groups that meet throughout our city every single week, most of them weekly. When I was preparing this message, felt like I needed to say this morning, that there's a whole lot of people who come here on Sundays, but you have not put down roots by creating friendships. You haven't connected with the group, or you haven't built friendships. You haven't put yourself out there. You're happy to arrive, enjoy, and leave. There's more to being rooted than that. Part of Christ's nutrients come to us through other people. Let's get rooted. If that fits you, what about this week inviting somebody for dinner, or having a coffee, or getting connected, doing something to change that? Secondly, Christ is my source because, number 2, He wants me to be very fruitful. Consider these phrases we read earlier. He said, even more fruitful, verse 3. Bear much fruit, verse 5. Bear much fruit, verse 8. But I've chosen, appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. It seems to me from this verse that when Christ inspects, maybe I can use Jax as the example, she's my wife. When Christ inspects the tree of her life, over her lifetime, He expects to find fruit, much fruit, and fruit that will last. Not just church attendance, not just spiritual activity, but fruit, a life, a behavior that is what He calls fruitful. Now, in a normal tree, fruit brings nourishment to others and pleasure to the owner, the farmer, if you're thinking of an orchard. God, if He considers this orchard of CityHIll Church, is looking for fruit in our lives that nourishes the lives of others and brings Him pleasure. If every single one of us are trees in this metaphor, branches that nourish others and bring Him great glory. There's too much in this for me to even cover it in the time we have this morning. But the one fruit that Jesus said in John 15, the number one fruit that we should be known by is the fruit of love. It's the fruit of love. How much love hang off the branches of our lives? Not just for our people closest to us, spouses, family, children, parents, etc., etc. Not just our friends, not just those that can benefit us, but love for the world. Do we carry the fruit of love? Because that's what Christ is looking for from our lives.